Over the course of his adventure, Luke trains to become a Jedi Knight, deriving his power from a mystical energy known as the Force. But along the way, the script went through radical changes. At one point, Luke was a 60-year-old general, and Han Solo had green skin and gills. Even the concept of the Force had yet to be fully realized. Instead, there was the Kyber crystal, a sort of galactic holy grail.
The concept of the Force was an important one in the story, and the difficulty is trying to create a religious, spiritual concept that works in a very simple way without heavy exposition or without it seeming to pull down the story.
It got to be a very fat script, about 200 pages, and the story had gotten away from me. So the only way I could cope with it was to say, I'll take the first third, the first act, and I'll make that into a movie. But I'd written all this other stuff. I'd spent a year writing this story, and I said, well, I'm not going to just throw away 2/3 of my year and say, this is all I can afford at this point. This is the only amount of money I'm going to get us to do this one movie. So I put it on the shelf, and I said, by hook or by crook, I will finish this movie.
But Star Wars wouldn't be cheap. To get the Fox Board of Directors to approve the necessary budget, Lucas needed something dramatic. He hired Ralph McQuarrie, a conceptual design artist who had worked for Boeing.
I'd seen some of his paintings, and I thought he was really brilliant. I had said, look, I want you to do some paintings of these scenes that I've done so that the studio can get a picture of what it is I'm talking about. When I turned in the script, I had about 5 or 6 drawings that I turned in with it also to say, this is what it's going to look like.
He had a concept for a big, spectacular visual, and it didn't come across in the script. So I tried to give it scale, juxtaposing the tiny little figures with the great, spectacular backgrounds. George would say, don't worry about how we're going to do it. We just want to see an impression of what the scenes would look like on the screen.
McQuarrie's artwork won over the Fox Board of Directors, who soon approved a budget of just over $8 million. With only the first part of his Star Wars saga being made, Lucas also needed to think about the future. But his prior dealings with major studios had taught him to be cautious.
When I made the deal for Star Wars, originally I made the deal before American Graffiti had even come out. Because Alan Ladd had seen the film American Graffiti. He said, I'll make a deal. But he made a very, you're going to make X number of dollars and this kind of thing. And it was a very, one-page memo. When it came up to doing the contract for the film, which was about a year later, I knew that what I really had to do was to protect the unwritten part, the other 2 parts of the script.
All of a sudden, Graffiti comes out, and it's a big, huge smash success. So his agent came back and said, well, hey, look, this guy's made this huge, successful movie now. Don't you think we should get more than $200,000 for writing, directing, and producing a movie? I said, yeah, I think you should get more.
I was very careful to say, I don't want more money, I don't want more points, I don't want anything financial, but I do want the right to make these sequels. I was working on the assumption, as every filmmaker works on, which is the film will be a disaster, and that it won't be promoted and it'll just die a horrible death. And it'll be very hard to get these next 2 movies made.
George said, like a big slice of the merchandising. Up until that time, merchandising had been relatively unknown.
When I took over the licensing, I simply said, I'm going to be able to make T-shirts, I'm going to be able to make posters, and I'm going to be able to sell this movie, even though the studio won't. So I managed to get control of pretty much everything that was left over that the studio didn't really care about.
George was enormously far-sighted, and the studio wasn't, because they didn't know that the world was changing. George did know the world was changing. I mean, he changed it.
With his Star Wars contract completed, George Lucas now needed a rebel force up to the challenge of production. In the summer of 1975, he founded the visual effects company Industrial Light and Magic.
There was no special effects companies in those days, and the studio's special effects department had been disbanded. Part of that was because of the expense, and Part of it was that the American taste, the culture had gone toward very realistic-looking films.
We approached the visual effects as a grand experiment, saying, can we do this with a lot of people who work on architectural models and in commercials and have never made feature films before?
We were kind of like a weird kind of fraternity of robotic photography nuts or something like that. I mean, this was a big movie for Fox. We were doing commercials. We all dreamed about doing a feature, and this was like the dream come true. So Star Wars came along just the perfect time for us.
We moved into a big empty warehouse in Van Nuys, right near the Van Nuys airport, and basically started from scratch. I mean, it was empty. I mean, early days, you used to park your car inside. There was no cam equipment, no rooms to speak of.
Supervising at ILM was John Dykstra, an effects cameraman who had worked under Douglas Trumbull on films like Silent Running.
I was essentially to be responsible for doing the visual effects for the film. We took the concept of motion control, which is essentially an old concept of being able to duplicate camera motion through more than one pass so that you can generate multiple elements of film, and we made it production savvy by tying it into a computer, which was at that point custom-built microprocessors. There were no PCs. You didn't go down buying a PC. We built them from scratch.
At the same time the camera system was being built, another team began constructing model spaceships.
I was one of the early hires. They had a small art department, and there were some concept models made out of cardboard and model kit pieces. There were some storyboards and some concept illustrations that Joe Johnson had done. There were some paintings that Ralph McQuarrie had done.
Everything came either from my sketches or Ralph's paintings and drawings and any input that George might have, you know. There wasn't a lot of outside influences on Star Wars.
George wanted it to look like you could actually see the rivets, so you could see the logic of how it was made. I was originally hired to work on the Death Star, the 40-foot by, 40 by 80 feet or 40 by 60 feet or something like that. Nobody wanted to do the job because you had to spend a lot of time on your knees.
Everybody sort of could cross-train and work in different techniques. That was different than the Hollywood system that had very strict sort of union rules. But there was no way that this work could be done that way, or no way that the Hollywood unions could understand what we were doing.
With pre-production gaining momentum, Lucas next began the process of casting his galactic opus. He shared the audition stage with his friend Brian De Palma, who was seeking actors for the Stephen King shocker, Carrie.
It just happened that we were both making these movies and casting at the same time, so we decided to combine our efforts. I've made movies with very young people that have no track record, so I have to kind of go through and discover them, pick them, and then test them and go through them and have readings. And so it takes a long time. I spent probably 6 or 7 months casting Star Wars, and that's a long process to sit in a little room and interview people. And I interviewed thousands of people.
In casting the male leads, Luke Starkiller and Han Solo, Lucas looked for individual screen presence as well as chemistry between performers.
Well, it checks out again. There's no mistake. You can't find Organa Major? I found it. It's just not there. Oh, I found it. It's just not there. What's left of it is contaminated. That's it there. Look at those radiation readouts. It's impossible. I've never seen anything like it. The Empire must have gotten here first. The planet has been completely blown away.
For the pivotal role of Luke, Lucas needed an actor who could project both intelligence and integrity.
Well, she's part of the royal family. They don't get anything out of her. She knows the power of mind control.
She's part of the royal family. They won't get any information from her. She knows the art of mind control.
24-year-old Mark Hamill was a familiar face on television. A newcomer to films, his wholesome, easygoing manner fit the part perfectly.
I can remember a line from the screen test, which I don't think ever will leave me. And Luke says, but we can't turn back. Fear is their greatest defense. I doubt if the actual security there is any greater than it was on Aquilai or Sullust, and what there is most likely directed towards a large-scale assault.
Fear is their greatest defense. I doubt if the actual security there is much greater than on Aquilai or Sullust, and what there is most likely directed towards a large-scale assault.
And I read that line, I thought, who talks like this? So I just did it sincerely.
Well, how many more systems have to get blown away before you have no place to hide and are forced to fight? Don't you realize what's going on?
Kid, you take the glory and the good intentions. I'll take the reward.
The role of Han Solo needed someone older, with a more cynical edge.
What's that little droid carrying that's so blasted important?
What's the little droid carrying that's so important?
Harrison Ford had worked with Lucas on American Graffiti, but because the director initially only wanted new faces, he was not allowed to audition.
Wait a sec, do I have to sit up to get in the...
Instead, he was brought in to feed lines to the other actors.
I was given sides and asked if I would help read the other actors. It became my task to explain to the other actors who were coming along just what it was that these sides were meant to be about.
They're going to follow us. They'll destroy your hidden bases. Yeah. They'll destroy the whole system.
Right, I know they'll follow, and they'll bring the Death Star, too.
Lucas may have been reluctant to use Ford at first, but the actor won him over by giving Han a mix of mercenary swagger and world weariness.
All right.
Well, what was so clear was what the idea was of the character relationships. Mark was the callow youth, and I was the smartass, and we each had a clear section of turf to explore.
The planet's totally blown away. It would have taken 1,000 ships with more firepower than I've ever seen to do that. If the Empire had a new weapon that could do this, I'd know about it. I'd have heard something.
Well, you know about it now. The enemy's on the move. We haven't much time.
Well, I brought you here. Now what?
We've got to find the rebels. What we're carrying belongs to them.
Their bases are very well hidden, son. All the power of the Empire can't find them. Do you know where they are?
No, not anymore.
Well, I'm not going to take you on an impossible chase across the galaxy.
Virtually every young actress in Hollywood tried out for the part of Princess Leia. Although the character was the same age as Luke, as a leader of the rebellion, Leia needed to project a confidence beyond her years.
The plans and specifications to a battle station with enough firepower to destroy an entire system. Our only hope in destroying it is to find its weakness, which we will determine from the data I stored in R2.
Now, our only hope in destroying it is to find its weakness, which we'll do from the data I stored in R2. Okay? Now, we captured the plans in a raid on the Imperial shipyards, but we fell under attack before I could get the data to safety, so I hid it in R2 and sent him off.
When R2 has been safely delivered to my forces, you get your reward.
What?
You have my guarantee.
What's the little droid carrying that's so blasted important?
The plans and specifications to a battle station with enough firepower to destroy an entire system.
One actress in particular seemed tailor-made to play a princess. As the daughter of actress Debbie Reynolds and singer Eddie Fisher, Carrie Fisher was the product of Hollywood royalty. She had no trouble conveying the self-assurance needed for Leia Organa.
I met with Brian De Palma and George, and Brian did all the talking, because George didn't talk then. There were incredible actresses that were my age that were being considered for this role, so I didn't think I would get it.
But our only hope is to destroy it before it destroys us. Look, hiding is useless now. With the Death Star, they'll continue to go on destroying systems until they found us. We have no alternative but to process the information and use it while there's still time.
I got it with the proviso that I went to a fat farm and that I lose 10 pounds. And that I think they were hoping it was going to come out 5 here and 5 here. And my character was someone who was feisty and all of that. But I felt myself to be a bit of that, too. So it would have been unlikely that I would be cast as a shrinking Violet. He cast us to type in a way.
Lucas's decision to hire unknowns went against the advice of his friend Francis Ford Coppola, who had cast The Godfather with stage and screen stars. 20th Century Fox was also concerned about Lucas's choice of actors.
He came in and said, these are the 3 unknown people that I want to go with. And I figured we've gone down this far on the road. He knows what he's doing. I'd be lying if I